It is a heavy moment. It's a moment that can have us perhaps landing in different places in terms of how we're feeling, probably despair, anger, numbness, outrage, anxiety. Uh, those are all places we might be landing right now. It's a heavy moment. It's a wilderness moment. How are we going to make our way through this? For our meeting's agenda, we will structure our time around three ways in which we can journey together through this wilderness of pain and grief. We will focus on three ways we can collectively move together through this wilderness. First, we turn toward God and each other. Second, we discern. And third, we act. We've got some guest speakers today who will help stimulate and inform our thoughts in each of these areas. And we will set aside time for three breakout rooms with discussions related to each of these three areas. We'll begin with turning toward God. The Reverend Jerry Lukula, who has been part of our planning team this past year, will open us with prayer. Go ahead, Jerry.
Thank you, Dr. Brooks, and good to see everyone. For this is a great day, a great gathering, again, a new reality. As we gather, let us join our hearts together and look to the Lord in prayer. Let us pray. Today, dear Lord, we gather in your name. We ask you, Lord, to heal our hearts. Where there is grief, bring assurance. Where there is pain, please bring relief, O Lord. Where there is fear, we pray for security. For all you, O Lord, you are our green pastures. You epitomize every giving life nutrient and sustenance for our soul. Help us, O Lord, to find peace and comfort in your name. We ask all of these, O Lord, as you strengthen us to be good stewards of your great creation. For this is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
Right. Thank you, Jerry, for grounding us in prayer. We turn toward God and we turn to each other. It's in friendship, fellowship, and community that the Spirit often moves to provide us with the support that we need. This morning, the executive director of the Sierra Club sent out an email in which he began by noting, we've been here before. And it reminded me of where we were at the first time Trump was elected. A couple of things happened in my personal life and in the life of the UCC the time that first Trump was elected. I found myself on a personal level reaching out to my godfather. My godfather is an ordained Lutheran minister, former dean of a seminary, and whenever I introduce him as my godfather, he imitates kind of a mafia boss. Thinks it's silly that I introduce him that way, but I always think I want people to know that we have a special relationship because of when I was baptized. He was chosen by my parents to have that special relationship, and it's been meaningful. And so he's someone that I reached out to. So I want to invite you to think about who you reach out to in these times. I also thought about how the UCC Council for Climate Justice was pretty new at the time of Trump's first election to office. And one of our first actions was to join with Green Faith in organizing climate vigils across the country on Inauguration Day. And so we've turned to each other in the past, and we've been with each other in the past and have been on this journey. Sue, I know you've got a story from just this morning to tell. Sue Mueller, who's been our Climate Hope campaign leader, is with us. Sue, would you like to tell us about what you've experienced?
Yeah. So yesterday, my daughters, I have four children, and two of them are still living at home. They are adults, but living at home, and they are both LGBTQ. And so this morning, when we woke up to the news, of course, they had both been up the whole night watching the election. They were both just absolutely devastated and really didn't know which direction to turn. And so, as a mom, my heart's breaking for them in their worry on what the future is. So I contacted our pastor and, said, "Hey, I'm going to bring the girls by. That okay? And are the dogs there?" And so, yes, they were. And please come by anytime. So I did. I took the girls. And as we were walking into the church, my oldest daughter, Emma, who's 25, she said, "I feel like crying again." And I said, "You know what? That's okay. You can cry. And, here we're in a safe place." And so she did a little bit. We came in, we pet the dogs, and we talked to Alex, the pastor, and the receptionist, and we prayed together. And, we just brought comfort to one another. And I think that is the most important thing that we can do right now, is to support each other and pray together and look forward from that and try to remain positive. And I think it changed my daughter's perspective this morning. So it was the right action to take for us and for my family.
Thank you, Sue, for sharing that story. I know as a parent, that was the main reality I woke up to this morning, is thinking about, how do I talk to my kids and what am I going to say? So I appreciate your example of how you've been there for your kids and what you've done with them. So now I want to, give all of you an opportunity to have some time to connect with each other, to turn toward each other. And so we're going to do breakout rooms. And in your breakout rooms, I want to invite you to thank the person you are with for their presence and being with you today, and then share your thoughts on who you can lean on and who you can journey with in this wilderness moment that we are in. All right. Okay, well, I hope each of you had some time to connect with each other and to share. We're now going to transition to that second part of how we can move together through the wilderness, and that is we come together to discern. And so we've got a couple of people here with us today, special guests to help us with our discernment. We've got Robin Lewis, the Climate Equity Director for Interfaith Power and Light's kind of Greater DC area chapter and office. We've got Abigail Cipriani, who is the Domestic Policy Advocate for the UCC and our DC Advocacy Office. So we're really grateful to both of you for joining with us. Robin is no stranger to the UCC Council for Climate Justice, has been a member and a part of that from early on. And so, I can't think of really better people to have with us today. So just to start things off, Robin and Abigail, on a human level, just tell us how you're processing the results from yesterday's election.
I can go first, Abigail. After I picked my jaw up off the ground and kind of woke out of my trance when I saw the results. I turned, of course, immediately to my faith and just praying and knowing that my ancestors have went through so much more and have been are suffering, and a lot of people I know are suffering, and working in environmental justice as I do. I know it's a battle, so I'm processing it. I'm still processing it like everyone else, but I'm also thinking about, okay, what do I do next? Like, what's my action? Because I am an action-oriented person. So I don't want to act too fast, but I don't want to act too slow. So that's kind of where my head is at this very moment. Like, what can I do? I feel like I did all I could do before the election, and now what can I do now? Like, what can I do to help, ensure that communities get the help they need? So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, and I just add on to that by saying I think the one thing that made me yeah, get out of the trance. I'll say it. I'm still kind of in the trance myself. But what has helped me is thinking that the work continues. You know, I think that just as yesterday we were committed to a vision of a healthy planet and the thriving of all people, the ability, the access to clean water, the access to a safe place to sleep, we are still committed to those things. And we will continue to be committed to those things because we believe in it as people of faith. And I think that that commitment is something that I'm really holding on to, that that doesn't change day to day, and it doesn't change from yesterday, and it doesn't change from tomorrow. Yeah, but it is a huge loss to process, and I encourage everyone to take the time to grieve. It's really is a mourning process, and so to grieve what is lost with this transition.
Yeah, thanks to both of you for sharing on a personal level where you're at. I think in some ways the situation in which we find ourselves, it's in some ways it's simple, right? The presidency, the House, and the Senate are all held by a party that has laid out a vision that would be a disaster in so many ways, especially climate. So as you think about that situation, I mean, what are your first thoughts when you think about what this means for us and what the immediate implications are?
Abigail, I went first last time, so you go first this time.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main implication that I see on the climate justice end is the rollback of climate protections. I think that is the biggest risk and what we'll have to fight for the next few years. I think what we've seen is that there will be a hesitancy surrounding regulating corporations that try to extract and take advantage of protected lands. So I imagine that there will be continued fights surrounding expanding drilling, transitioning more towards a fuel economy. And so that's really where I see the biggest fights to be. I also think that there is going to be a lot of, with this transition also comes a loss in environmental justice, which I'll let Robin speak to more because I know that's her specialty area. But I think that particularly for marginalized communities, I think there is going to be a lack of, not only a lack of consideration, but also a certain level of targeting when it comes to the policies that we see in an upcoming administration that is pretty resistant to any sort of regulation surrounding the climate. Yeah, so.
Yeah, thanks. You've covered a lot of what I was thinking. I just want to throw one more thing in there. To the communities that are overburdened, underserved, a lot of the Inflation Reduction Act funding and the Infrastructure Act, infrastructure funding were targeted towards those communities. Climate in general, but those communities were getting some additional help. And my concern is that people wait and people don't go after those funds and think those funds they'll just be there. And, so my hope and my encouragement to others is that if you have something to do that's sustainable, for your house of worship, solar, energy efficiency, EV charging stations, all the things that the funding, community gardens, anything that you can access that funding for, my thought is to do it. Because I don't want to see that money, it jeopardized in any way, and we just don't know. So what we need to do is, make sure we help those communities by helping them get access those funds now and not wait. So, that's my concern, because those funds were really making a difference in the communities that I work in, and with congregations that I work with. So I'm encouraging people to, okay, I know you've been thinking about this, flip the switch, do it, go for it, So that's what I was thinking. Federal and state, not just federal, but state funds too.
Yeah, thanks. Robin, you mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act, and I'm wondering if what for both of you are your takes on potential for defending what exists with the Inflation Reduction Act. We probably many of us remember that when that was passed, part of the articulated strategy was that um, in districts with elected officials that might otherwise oppose the Inflation Reduction Act, there might soon be a battery plant, or things that would be funded for the Inflation Reduction Act, which would make it harder for those members of Congress to then, come out against the Inflation Reduction Act, which created those benefits for those that they serve. Is that part of the advocacy strategy moving forward, or what is kind of the strategy around defending the gains made with the Inflation Reduction Act?
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, I could come up with one quick, but to be honest, I think we need to put our heads together and figure out what's the most efficient, expeditious. I mean, what is the best way for us to actually make sure that communities that are the least of these are, benefit from the funds that currently are out there. Okay, so I don't know that there's because a lot of money hasn't been rolled out yet. And that's the challenge. And, because of that, the rules and the guidelines associated with the use of the money, we all think Justice 40 is, some people think it's a law. It's not. It's a, recommendation, if you will. That those terms can be changed, if there's no specific, guidance anywhere from the federal government, or if the guidance can change. In order to access those funds, it could, they could expand what they mean by Justice 40, or what they mean by overburdened, underserved communities. So, my thought is that we as the church need to make sure the least of these are the ones who benefit, and we need to advocate for that and stay on top of that, and stay on top of our state government advocacy, and our local governments as well, and just advocate for the communities that need it the most, and we know them. And we need to stay on that. That's not, we have to keep our foot on that gas. In fact, we might have to speed up. We do have to speed up. So that's my thought.
Yeah, and I'll just say, in addition to that, I mean, I think we already saw this in a lot of ways. I remember towards the beginning of when the House flipped to Republicans, there was a lot of attempts to roll back the Inflation Reduction Act, specifically the tax credits portion. And there was actually so much resistance in Republican districts that they stopped talking about it. At first, they thought that it would be a really popular platform to run on. And then suddenly they realized it wasn't. And they quieted down. And I think that type of advocacy and that type of getting together with your churches, with your communities, and sitting down with these legislators and saying it's not good for anyone, regardless of your political party, to be against clean energy, to be against funding to people that are across party benefiting from this. And I think that is where we do have some leeway, where there are opportunities to, at the very least, protect what has already been passed. And I know that is not something that I think as people of faith, we also need to be pushing for more, as always, because we believe in a radical, just world for all, right? A world that is more than what we have right now. But I think when we're thinking about defending what has already been passed, we can remember that these policies are broadly popular. They are not policies that are something that are just a policy that's been supportive of a certain party. They are supportive of all people, and legislators need to realize that. And so I think that there is an opportunity there to protect the policies in the Inflation Reduction Act moving forward. We just need to make sure that, our messaging, our narrative is is one that brings in all people, and I think faith communities have a real strength with that.
Abigail, I appreciate how you frame that in terms of defending the laws that have been passed and also, casting the broader vision rooted in justice. I think, perhaps a third component, I imagine, in advocacy for the coming year is also preventing what could be passed. And they're, thinking in particular about some of the discussions we've had about Project 2025. So we did a whole webinar on that, but just, quickly, I mean, is it, is this sort of in the next the first 6 months of next year, we're going to be, addressing, the things that were in Project 2025? Any thoughts on what might be held in the next year with regard to that?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think the main thing that we will see is a gutting of federal agencies. And I think that portion of Project 2025 will be underway from the minute that the administration switches. We saw that in previous administration changes, and I think we'll see it again here. I saw some, there's been discussion about like halving the size of each federal agency. And when it comes to something like the EPA, that's regulation. That's people that are on the ground making sure that the corporation that is trying to get a drilling license even thinks about the communities they could harm, right? Like it's those types of people that are getting fired when the EPA is cut. Same with NOAA. There's going to be a lot of issues with disaster relief surrounding NOAA and FEMA. And because of the gutting of federal agencies, I think that'll be one of the like fastest things that happen. Luckily, federal rulemaking is actually quite hard to reverse. It takes a very, very long time. If a rule has already been like finally published in the Federal Register. And so that means that a lot of the emissions regulations that were finalized under the Biden administration, it will take a while if a future administration wanted to reverse that, to actually reverse that. And so I do want to say that, like, I think the next 90 days, there will be a lot of work that needs to be done to make sure all of those rules are finalized. So it's hard, they are harder to reverse. But I think that the first 6 months in my mind is primarily going to be just like cutting staff, cutting resources for the federal agencies that keep us safe.
Yeah, just to add to that, cutting those agencies also, and I keep going back to funding because I know that a lot of people depend on it, and cutting those agencies even if the funding is available, it may delay, like the EPA, because they're understaffed as it is, and a lot of our like in Maryland, for example, our environmental organizations are at the government level, at the state level, are understaffed as well. So that delays, getting the funding out and getting evaluations done and getting new proposals out. So, I think that's why quick, fast, and in a hurry, if we can start doing things earlier instead of waiting for these cuts to occur, because that's low hanging fruit. Like, Abigail just mentioned, what's the quickest thing you can do? And so given that, all hope is not lost. I mean, we know this. We know the playbook. We've seen it. They've given it to us. So now all we have to do is strategize. They gave us the playbook. So now we know. I'm not a football person, but my son is. So if you have the playbook from the opposite team, you know what to do, and you know how to, or you can figure how to go around those things and invert and, kind of get your play in, given that theirs. So, I think that's what we need to do. I mean, like my son who's 33 said to me, the world's not over, Mom. I mean, I know we were, my son was really engaged and, but guess what? He said, we've been through things. I mean, coming from a African American Black perspective, we've been through a lot and we still are. So therefore, People get through these things. We just have to have faith, and we also have to have determination and resilience. We have to, have those things to get through that. But faith is first.
Thanks. I appreciate you orienting us to the importance of being faith rooted in our advocacy and what we do. I think one final question before we transition to our next part. I'm going to, normally I'm not one for sports metaphors either, but I do want your remarks, Robin, did make me think of, if there's 4 quarters to a game, just focusing on the next few quarters it's hard to have a lot of hope. And so I'm just thinking, what are your thoughts about the importance, or if you agree, of having a vision that goes to, let's say, 2030, 2029, 2030, as we, we get into the trenches and in defending or rejecting particular legislation in the next year. But to me, it sometimes helps to have a little something a little further down that can be a vision for some hope. So, any thoughts on how we kind of might think with some long-term orientation, maybe?
Yeah, I think we have to walk and chew gum. I mean, we have to do the short-term stuff, which we're talking about, and we also have to think strategically long-term, because guess what? The party that is in charge as of January did think long-term, and we need to also not forget that this is a long-term game. This is not just, it's not just this little battle. It's a whole war. And we know that, we war not against flesh and blood. We know that. So we have to always think further, and we know and with our faith that we have, and being anchored in our faith, that we have to think, okay, I got to do this now, but what can I do for the future? Because this is about the future. So we have to really start planning strategically for the future while we implement. We got to walk and chew gum.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I mean, I think this is also just it's so weird to think about, analyses of how this happened, but I think one thing that we do need to remember is this is a war over narrative too, particularly on the climate side, and over education. And so I think a lot of that long-term strategy will be reaching out, will be working with communities, will be speaking to people who may not realize how much of their lived reality is because of corporations and fossil fuel companies that created that lived reality. And I think that people making those connections is going to take a long time, but it is like such good and important work. And so thinking about, local organizing and just like local connecting within your communities is something that just has to happen long term, regardless of the current presidential situation. So holding on to that, I think, is really important.
Thank you so much, Abigail. I definitely would, really underscore the importance of local organizing. Just spent 3 days knocking on doors in Pennsylvania, and the facts on the ground, where you could tell that things were quite potentially headed towards a Trump victory in Pennsylvania based on the facts on the ground. And to change that, it does take local organizing. So let's take some time for breakout rooms again. Thank the person you're with, introduce yourself, and share your thoughts on the discernment that the election results are compelling for you. All right, welcome back, everyone. Hope you can continue to have some good and rich conversations. And for this next portion where, as we said, we're focusing on uh, we turn towards God and we turn towards each other. We discern, and then the third and final segment for today is we act. And in some ways it's a challenge because we're have so much to process right now in this moment to think about how to act and and what makes sense for us and so forth. And so I'll say just kind of as a context to review for many of you, we've been over the past couple of years been conducting these year-long climate campaigns, and we've been trying to add to what we're able to do each year through those campaigns. We knew we didn't know what the results of this election would be, obviously, but we also didn't want to be caught flat-footed. So we made plans to have an advocacy day of action on Valentine's Day of next year in relationship to members of Congress. And so Abigail, I'm wondering if, in your role and helping us in our DC office with those visits with people, if you can just help us to start wrap our heads around it. I think over the past 8 years, there's been an ongoing challenge. I think for many of us is like, how do we do advocacy in Congress? It's really hard to think about, and it's going to be especially hard to think about now. So if you can help us think through how you would kind of, I don't know, coach us on the prospect of advocacy with a member of Congress who you may hold very opposing views. And sometimes we have members who are unmotivated to do advocacy because they feel that their member of Congress already has the same views. And so just help us to think through that. I mean, obviously, I think the major challenge is thinking about advocacy with, Congress that's dominated by those with opposing views. But yeah, help us to think that through as we begin to prepare ourselves for continued advocacy.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, when thinking about meeting with a member of Congress who may be opposed to, say, any sort of climate action, I think what you need to remember first is normally if you're meeting with staff, it is not necessarily the case that that staff shares that member's view. A lot of times when working in Congress, staff from across the aisle will work with members that they don't necessarily politically align with. And so that is an opportunity for you. Or there's a lot of times when there's like a tricky question, like for example, on clean energy, where a staffer might be more friendly with clean energy policy than that member. And what they are looking for is a new perspective. And so you coming in as a faith community really opens the door to have a more a conversation surrounding the moral necessity of a clean energy transition that they wouldn't normally have with basically any other type of group that comes through their doors. And so when you think about speaking to members that might not agree with you or speaking to staff that might not agree with you, I encourage you to lean on your faith, because I personally have seen this in my work. The most salient example actually is that the faith community was the community in DC that ended up convincing Chuck Grassley to support re-entry and support for formerly incarcerated people for the first time. And how the faith community was able to do this was they spoke to Chuck Grassley and convinced him that it was the morally correct choice to support people who were formerly incarcerated to re-enter society. And that's just one example of how you can use your faith as a sort of superpower. When walking into a meeting with a member that you don't agree with, if you lean on the fact that you are coming in seeking a healthy planet, seeking the thriving of all, because you believe in the thriving of all, because you know that God calls you to support the thriving of all, that is a very compelling grounding that you can have with staff and with members who may disagree with you. The other thing to know is that a lot of times, members that may be politically different than you are very compelled by constituents that are affected by their policy. So for example, if they have a policy choice that supports fossil fuel companies, if they hear from a church, a local church, that support is something that really, really affects that church, and it's a local vocal church in their community, in their district, they need to, it is their like actual responsibility as an elected official to listen to you and consider that. I'm not saying that their mind will be changed overnight. I'm not saying that it's that easy, but I'm saying that because they are an elected official, they need to pay attention to what their constituents say. And honestly, faith communities, seniors, and young people are all groups that members in general want to please. And so you coming in as one of those or as a mixture of those is something that already opens doors for you, that allows you to have some of these conversations that might be actually more successful than you would expect. When it comes to members that you think are like totally on the same page as you, and then you're like, what, why would I spend my energy with someone who supports clean energy, with someone who supports Justice 40? What I say to that is having relationships with members and members of Congress, so senators or people in the House of Representatives, is a long-term project. And so, yes, it is so important to like understand that a lot of these members are going to be, if you have a friendly member, that like they will be friendly on climate change. But if you don't have that meeting with them, then maybe down the line when they introduce climate legislation or when they want the faith community's support on a disaster relief project that they have, and they want your perspective, they won't know to reach out unless you've already made that meeting. And so it's not just the like one-time meeting saying, I want you to prioritize climate change, like I know you will. It's also the years-long relationship that you could start that could allow you to help weigh in on legislation that could help you guys get solar panels or legislation that gains you funding. And so, or I mean, even in like more selflessly, helps you 5 years down the line when that member of Congress or that senator is in a completely different political situation that is, whereas Congress is much more friendly to climate, they are going to be much more amenable to your feedback on whatever they are doing. So it's a longer term project, but it's just as valuable. And it's also very valuable to help climate champions understand and have the messaging to defend their positions. And you coming in as a church or as a faith community and saying, hey, we support you. We support you because all of these concrete things that are happening in our community that you may not know about, but could help you argue for Justice 40 or for fighting fossil fuel companies. That helps them defend their positions when they may be being placed on the back foot by climate deniers. So I think those are the things that are top of mind for me.
Yeah, thank you, Abigail. We're going to take a quick couple of minutes for one final breakout session for each of you to share your thoughts on how you and your congregation can take action in the coming months. And maybe a little bit early to start wrapping our heads around that, but I just want to encourage you to begin now, to begin talking with others about what kind of actions might be possible to take. And so Nia, if you could bring us into our breakout rooms, that would be great. As we come back together, I'm going to share in the chat. We do have a registration page up and running for churches to participate in the Valentine's Day action. And so I'm going to put in the chat the registration page for joining in the Valentine's Day action. We are going to do a training for people online to prepare them for that. And so when you register, you'll get information about that training, as well as some of the other important details for how to go about that. An important part will just be, making sure that you have what you need to set up appointments. And if needed, we can help with that. As we close, I want to share with you a quote, and actually my paraphrase of a quote. I often feel that in advocacy, we find ourselves, speaking for myself, certainly, in sort of the position Moses found himself in, not wanting to do advocacy with Pharaoh. No, I don't want to go. No, I can't do it. I can't. I'm not equipped and qualified to do it. Please do not send me. And when I think about that, I often think about my own paraphrase of a quote from Marshall Gantz, who was one of the lead organizers for United Farm Workers. And his quote, the way he put it is, leadership is about accepting responsibility for enabling others to achieve shared purpose in the face of uncertainty. Now, in my head, I forget all those words and I reduce that to this: leadership is the courage to act in the face of uncertainty. And so I want to encourage all of you to be leaders, be leaders in your community, simply by having the courage to act. That's what we need right now. And I believe that each of you is called and equipped and able and capable to be the leaders that we need in this moment. And so I invite all of you to sign up and register using that link. I'm happy to hang out here for a few minutes for those who might have some questions, but thank you all so much for being with us. We appreciate your gathering in this really critical time in which there is so much to contend with and so much to process. Take care, everyone.